The summer of 1973 settled over Winona, Minnesota, with the kind of relentless heat that made the Mississippi River shimmer like fractured glass beneath the sun. It was the kind of summer where kids stayed outside until fireflies floated through the dusk, where screen doors never stopped slamming, and where the whole town, barely a few thousand people, seemed to exhale after enduring another long, punishing winter. On July 14th, Main Street came alive for the annual River Days Festival. Colored lights strung across storefronts glowed as music drifted through the warm air. Cotton candy stands, Ferris wheels, and the faint echo of laughter turned the town into something almost magical. Among the crowd were 16-year-old twins Michael and Daniel Carvalho, identical in their dark hair and their mother's green eyes. They'd pleaded with their parents for permission to go that night. Their father, Antonio, a welder at the local plant, hesitated. Their mother, Maria, clutched her rosary and prayed silently before finally agreeing. The boys were good kids, honor students, altar servers at St. Stanislaus. They had earned a night of freedom. Just after 6 that evening, the twins rode off from their modest home on East 4th Street, their Schwinn bicycles gleaming in the fading light. Neighbors would later recall seeing them race each other down the block, laughter carrying through the sticky summer air. At the festival, they blended in easily, trying the ring toss, sharing a funnel cake, chatting with classmates near the tilt-a-whirl. Emma Renard, a quiet girl from their geometry class, remembered Michael buying her a lemonade. Daniel teased him for it. Everything felt normal, ordinary in the best possible way. By 9:30, as the sky deepened to indigo and the stars began to appear, the twins told friends they were heading home. Their curfew was 10 sharp. Antonio wasn't a man who tolerated lateness, but 10 came and went. Then 11. By midnight, Maria was pacing the kitchen, her footsteps tracing the same path between the refrigerator and the back door. Antonio drove through town twice, headlights sweeping across parking lots and side streets, calling their names into the empty night. At 12:45 a.m., he walked into the Winona County Sheriff's Office, hands trembling, and reported his sons missing. Deputy Frank Lombardi took the statement with practiced calm, assuring Antonio that teenagers sometimes lost track of time, that they'd likely be home by morning. But morning came, and the world was no longer the same. Just after sunrise at 6:15 a.m., a farmer named Carl Weber was driving along Highway 61 on his way to check his fields when something caught his eye: 2 bicycles lying in the tall grass near the shoulder. He recognized them instantly. In a small town, you notice those things. They were the Carvalho boys' bikes. Weber pulled over, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The bikes rested on their sides, their wheels still spinning slightly in the breeze. There were no skid marks, no obvious signs of a struggle, just 2 abandoned bicycles and the stillness of the valley stretching out toward the river. Within the hour, Highway 61 was transformed into a scene of organized urgency. Sheriff Donald Keller arrived with several deputies, their patrol lights flashing red and blue against the cornfields. The bikes were photographed and carefully placed into a county vehicle, handled like fragile evidence from a nightmare no one wanted to name. Behind the yellow tape, Antonio and Maria stood side by side, silent and pale. Maria's fingers moved quickly over her rosary beads. Antonio just stared at the spot where the bicycles had lain, willing his sons to appear from the mist rising off the river. By noon, the search effort had begun. In Winona, tragedy had a way of uniting people. More than 200 residents gathered near Latch Island, where the Mississippi curved through thick woods. They came in work boots and Sunday shoes, bringing coffee, flashlights, and hope. Father Joseph Quinn from St. Stanislaus offered a prayer before teams fanned out into the wilderness. Each group of 8 volunteers was assigned a grid, moving carefully through the underbrush, along riverbanks and into old forgotten properties. Bloodhounds from La Crosse were brought in, sniffing the boys' pillowcases and pulling eagerly at their leashes. The sound of their calls made Maria cover her ears and weep. For 14 days, the search continued. Volunteers waded through chest-high weeds in sweltering heat, their clothes soaked with sweat and river water. They climbed the bluffs, combed through abandoned mills, and peered into drainage ditches. Divers from the state police entered the dark waters of the Mississippi, searching by touch when sight failed them. Local radio stations broadcast hourly updates. The story consumed Winona. Each day brought new hope and deeper worry. In the evenings, Maria and Antonio sat stiffly on their living room couch for TV interviews, framed by family photos and fading light, pleading for answers that never seemed to come. Reporters asked questions no parent should ever have to answer. Maria, speaking softly in broken English, told them about her boys, how they never missed Sunday Mass, how Michael dreamed of becoming an engineer, and how Daniel wanted to be a doctor. Antonio said very little. He looked straight into the camera, his voice low and trembling, and spoke just 5 words that Winona would remember for generations. "Please, bring my boys home." But the boys never came home. Search teams scoured the area for weeks, finding only heartbreak disguised as hope. A torn shirt that belonged to someone else. A shoe too small to fit either twin, bones that turned out to be from a deer. As July drew to a close, the volunteers slowly returned to their daily lives. Work, family, and routine crept back in, though nothing in Winona felt the same. Inside the sheriff's office, the mood was heavy. On July 28th, Sheriff Donald Keller stood before a wall map covered with colored pins, marking every area that had been searched. Each pin represented another unanswered question. The Mississippi River flowed quietly past the town, ancient, powerful, and indifferent, keeping its secrets beneath the muddy surface. Keller sat in his cramped office above the courthouse, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling. The case file lay open in front of him, pages creased and smudged from sleepless nights. He'd been through it dozens of times, searching for something, anything, that might explain what had happened to Michael and Daniel Carvalho. The bikes had been found less than 2 miles from the festival, carefully placed in the grass both facing the river. It looked almost deliberate, as if the boys had set them down and walked away. But to where and why? 2 theories dominated the investigation and divided the department. The first was the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. Keller didn't want to believe it, but part of him couldn't rule it out. Teenagers sometimes ran away, even good kids, especially those who felt confined by strict parents or small-town expectations. Maybe the twins had planned it, saved a little money, and hitchhiked to a big city like Minneapolis or Chicago to start fresh. But that theory unraveled quickly. The boys' wallets were found in their bedroom dresser, containing nearly $80 between them. They hadn't taken a single personal item. And everyone who knew them, teachers, friends, their priest, said the same thing. Michael and Daniel were not the type to run away. They were grounded, responsible, and deeply devoted to their family. That left the second theory. The one whispered through town and discussed in hushed tones over coffee and late-night phone calls. Several residents reported seeing a dark-colored pickup truck in the neighborhood during the week before the disappearance. It was unfamiliar, and its presence didn't sit right with anyone who noticed it. Agnes Walsh, who lived just a few houses from the Carvalho home, saw the vehicle twice. She thought it might have been a Ford. Or a Chevy, dark blue or black, with out-of-state plates she couldn't quite read. The driver's face was hidden behind the glare of the sun. But the truck's slow, deliberate pace unsettled her. Harold Fisher, owner of the hardware store on 3rd Street, recalled a similar truck idling near the school playground on July 11th while kids played basketball. And perhaps most troubling of all was the statement from 16-year-old Jennifer Marino, who told deputies she'd seen a truck matching that same description parked near the Highway 61 boat landing on the night of July 13th, only hours before the festival, the very spot where the bicycles would later be found. Deputy Lombardi was convinced this wasn't a coincidence. He believed the boys had been approached, possibly targeted, by someone passing through town. But in 1973, small-town law enforcement had few tools to follow such a lead. There was no central database to check license plates, no way to track vehicles across county lines, and no cameras watching over parking lots or intersections. They had witness statements, vague, conflicting, and impossible to verify. Lombardi spent days on the phone with other sheriff's offices across Minnesota and Wisconsin, asking about missing teens or suspicious vehicles. Every call led to the same dead end. Nothing connected. Nothing fit. Then, a new name began circulating quietly. Not in reports, but in whispers. Thomas Bianchi. He was a physical education teacher at Winona Senior High, a job he'd held for more than a decade. He lived alone, unmarried, in a small rented house on West Broadway. Students described him as intense, sometimes unsettling, the kind of teacher whose attention could feel uncomfortable. 3 days after the disappearance, an anonymous call came into the sheriff's office. The female caller refused to give her name, but insisted that investigators look closely at Bianchi. She claimed he had offered the Carvalho twins rides home after school that spring, rides they politely refused. On August 2nd, Sheriff Keller and Deputy Lombardi went to question him. When they knocked, Bianchi answered in sweatpants and a rumpled undershirt. His eyes flicked nervously between the two officers. He invited them in, voice shaking slightly, and within minutes he was sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, hands clasped tightly on the table, breathing uneven. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on Thomas Bianchi's forehead. Despite the small fan oscillating in the corner, doing little to fight the August heat, the interrogation room smelled faintly of stale coffee and the ghost of countless cigarettes smoked during late-night interviews just like this one. Sheriff Keller sat across from him, notepad open, pen steady. Deputy Lombardi leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying the teacher with the quiet, unblinking focus of a man already convinced he knew the ending. The metal chair scraped against the linoleum as Bianchi shifted nervously. When he finally spoke, his voice tried for calm but cracked under the weight of fear. He said he'd been home the night of July 14th, watched the Twins play the Yankees, then gone to bed around 11. There was no one who could confirm it. He lived alone. Keller didn't respond. He simply waited. He knew from experience that silence was its own kind of question. Innocent people tended to fill it with facts. Guilty ones let it linger. Bianchi filled it. He began talking about his job, how rewarding it was to help young students gain confidence through sports. He mentioned Michael and Daniel Carvalho, called them talented, competitive, good kids. He said he'd maybe given them a ride once or twice when it rained, nothing more. That was what teachers did in small towns, wasn't it? Neighbors helping neighbors. His tone rose slightly at the end, as if asking permission to believe his own story. Lombardi stepped forward, the sound of his boots heavy in the small room. He started pressing, about the anonymous tip, about rumors from students who'd said Bianchi sometimes made them uncomfortable. Nothing ever officially reported, but talk that hung in the hallways of the high school. The teacher's face flushed red. He insisted he'd never done anything inappropriate, that the suggestion itself was slander. But Keller could hear the strain in his voice, the defensiveness that experience had taught him to recognize. Sometimes, the louder the denial, the less convincing it became. Keller asked about the truck. Did Bianchi own one? No, he drove a blue Plymouth Duster, parked right outside if they wanted to check. Did he know anyone with a dark pickup? He scoffed. Half the county drives pickups, Sheriff. That question doesn't mean anything. After 90 minutes, they had nothing solid. No proof, no confession, not even an inconsistency strong enough to follow. Bianchi's story didn't clear him, but it didn't condemn him either. When Keller finally told him he was free to go, Bianchi stood so quickly that his chair toppled to the floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. His hands were trembling as he pushed through the door into the blinding afternoon light. Lombardi watched him leave, jaw tight with frustration. They had only suspicion, and in 1973, suspicion wasn't enough for a warrant. But in a small town, rumors didn't need evidence to grow. Within days, whispers became headlines. Parents began calling the school board, demanding action. Shops went quiet when Bianchi walked in. Former students started coming forward with stories, nothing criminal but troubling enough to raise eyebrows. Comments that crossed boundaries, glances that lasted too long. The school board placed him on administrative leave while the sheriff's office continued its investigation, a decision that satisfied no one. The town was divided, half convinced of his guilt, half convinced he was the victim of hysteria. By spring of 1974, the case of Michael and Daniel Carvalho had settled into a painful stalemate. The once busy command post was now just a single file cabinet in Sheriff Keller's office, filled with unanswered questions, before DNA testing, before computerized databases, before surveillance cameras. The tools of modern forensics simply didn't exist yet. Keller revisited the file every few weeks, rereading witness statements he knew by heart, studying photographs of the abandoned bicycles until his eyes blurred. There was nothing new to find. The fingerprints on the handlebars belonged to the boys and the farmer who'd found them. The tire tracks near the site matched 1,000 vehicles that used Highway 61 every day. Without witnesses, without a body, and without physical evidence, the investigation was trapped in place. Thomas Bianchi remained the only real person of interest. But interest wasn't the same as guilt. Keller pushed as far as he legally could, interviewing every student who'd ever had him as a teacher. He found discomfort, unease, but not a single crime. When he applied for a warrant to search Bianchi's home and car, Judge Raymond Costa denied it, reminding him, "Suspicion without proof is persecution, Sheriff. The law doesn't move on gossip." By that fall, the school quietly reinstated Bianchi. They reassigned him to teach health instead of gym, keeping him away from locker rooms and one-on-one contact with students. Meanwhile, the Carvalho family began to fracture under the weight of grief. Antonio buried himself in 16-hour shifts at the plant, working until his hands blistered, anything to avoid the silence of a home frozen in time. Maria stopped attending Mass. Her faith had been replaced by quiet disbelief. She spent hours in her son's room, sitting on their beds, pressing their clothes to her face just to catch the faint scent that was slowly fading away. Neighbors brought casseroles that went uneaten. Father Quinn came by every week, but his words found no purchase in a house steeped in sorrow. By 1975, the Carvalho name had become part of Winona's folklore, a warning whispered to children when they stayed out past dark. The case file grew thinner instead of thicker. Hope was replaced by resignation. Deputy Lombardi eventually transferred to another county. He couldn't stand the reminders. The empty desks at school, Maria's haunted eyes in the grocery store. Life, relentless as ever, moved on. New crimes, new emergencies, new distractions. And the twins became a story. A legend that no one wanted to believe was true. In November 1976, after 3 unbearable years, Antonio and Maria packed their belongings into a rented truck and left Winona behind. They moved to Boston, where Maria's cousin worked in a textile factory, where no one recognized them. And no one asked about the boys. Sometimes survival means leaving everything behind, even the last place your children were seen, alive. The case was declared a cold case in 1977 and placed in the courthouse basement among dozens of other unsolved files, a quiet archive of unanswered prayers. Keller retired in 1982, still haunted by the photographs of 2 identical bikes and the faces of 2 boys he could not bring home. New deputies occasionally reopened the file, believing they might see something others had missed. But they always ended the same way, staring at the same questions and closing the same folder, resigned to mystery. Thomas Bianchi continued teaching health classes until 1988. He never married, never built close friendships. To his students, he seemed like a man running on empty, someone whose spark had been extinguished long ago. When he finally retired, there was no farewell party, no plaque, just a short notice in the Winona Daily News. He moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, hoping to live quietly among strangers who didn't know his history. Back in Winona, the Mississippi kept flowing, silent, endless, and unbothered. The place where the bicycles had once been found became overgrown. The flowers left by mourners fall,